My friend, ole wako, if you had been compensated at say 100,000 and then you take your employer to court and your employer wins the case and probably you get a lesser amount, let's say 60,000, you can't come back and say, hey, wacha tuchukue ile ya WIBA. The moment you're done with WIBA, you're done with WIBA. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever it is you're watching from, my name is James Kinuthia Waithaka. I run a company called SafePro Limited, which is a health and safety consultancy firm. I normally basically talk to you about health and safety compliance, and today I want us to talk about WIBA 2007. I know the act we discuss most of the time is OSHA 2007, which is an act of parliament that basically tells you as an employer what to do to keep your workers safe on a daily basis when they report to the workplace. So the act guarantees employees three things: health, safety, and welfare, anytime they walk into your workplace, whether you're doing production, service sector, education sector, wherever it is you are. Every employee that is under you has certain rights and you have obligations as the employer under OSHA 2007. But this is life. And sometimes even the best plans will fail. Sometimes even the most meticulously designed systems will fail. And when failure happens, then what do? So we have a sixth act that we call WIBA 2007. Workman's Injury Benefits Act, or Workers' Injury Benefits Act 2007 also. Same year as OSHA 2007. What does this act talk about? It talks about the benefits that are accrued from an injury or an illness. First of all, the name benefits in itself, it does not sit well with me, but anyway, that is what they call it, because how do you benefit from an injury? Or how do you benefit from an illness? But anyway, there's an ongoing discussion to basically repeal it and have it sound differently and a different model. However, we're talking about it as it is now. WIBA 2007, Workman's Injury Benefits Act. What does it address? It addresses the compensation that you receive as an employee in case you get injured or you fall ill in the course of your work. I need to be very particular here that it is only covering injuries and illnesses that have occurred as a result of the work that you're doing. Take an example. You're heading to the workplace, you get an accident. That is not covered. But you get into the workplace and you're put into a company vehicle, you're going from Westlands to let's say Ruiru, and you get an accident. You're in the course of duty. So you are covered under WIBA and you're going to be compensated. So it is only injuries and accidents that have arisen from the course of your duty. Take a messenger. When they report into the workplace in the morning and they leave the office to go deliver a letter or do a delivery somewhere, they are in the course of their duty. Whatever happens to them during that hour of working is covered under WIBA 2007. When they clock out of the workplace and they are heading home and they get an injury or an accident, they are not covered under WIBA. They'll follow the insurance of the perpetrator, whether it's a bike, a vehicle, or whatever case it is. So WIBA covers only incidents and illnesses that have happened in the course of your working. However, insurance has become also a bit clever, and they've come up with a product we call WIBA Plus. So under WIBA Plus is basically a combination of WIBA, where it covers you during working hours, and the general personal accident cover that covers you outside working hours. So if your employer has WIBA Plus, it means you're covered both when you're working and when you're out of work. But if you have just plain WIBA as a cover, then your employer has only covered you during the working hours. And there is no requirement under the law for them to do what WIBA Plus. So don't go asking your employer, why do we have WIBA plain? No. It is at the prerogative of the employer to decide what is the best for their employees. And of course, it also depends on the capacity of the employer. And it also depends on the systems in place at your workplace. Anyway, so let's talk about WIBA. Today you get injured. What is the procedure? You as an employer, your employee has gotten injured. What are you supposed to do? There's a requirement under the law that any accident that happens in the workplace must be reported to DOSH. And this is done using a form we call DOSH 1. DOSH 1 has two parts. Part 1 is where the employer fills the particulars of the employee. You tell us their name, their gender, their age, their pay, their role in the business, what they were doing at the time of the accident, and what they are assigned to do in that business. so that sometimes it could be like we had a case, I think, in Webuye paper mills, where a guard was actually wound up by a machine. And so you wonder, was the guard standing in for a machine operator, or what exactly was happening? So it is an issue of what were they doing at the time of injury and what are they supposed to be doing in the business. So you fill in all those particulars, and then you also attach evidence of how much you pay them. What is their basic pay? And basic pay includes all the other regular allowances that you give. If you normally give entertainment allowance, transport allowance, security allowance, commuter allowance, whatever allowance it is that you give, it forms part of their basic pay. I'll tell you why basic pay is important. Let's first of all finish with the reporting. So you fill part 1, DOSH, part 1, and you submit it. DOSH 1, part 1. Submit it to DOSH. Initially, you would need to travel all the way to the county headquarters to submit it. But today, DOSH has moved a step forward, and they have what you call DOSH Miss. It is a system where after you fill your documents, you upload to the system, and you just fill in the details under the accident notification tab. So you need to actually have registered and have an account with DOSH as an employer. That is part 1. So the injured person is taken to the hospital, they're undergoing treatment, maybe they even broke an arm, they have a cast, they wait for the 3 months or the 4 months or the 6 months. After they are done with treatment, the doctor will do an assessment, a final assessment, and say, I've been treating Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, and from that injury, this person has fully recovered. So they did not suffer any disability. So it is 0%. So basically that means from your employer, the only thing you're going to get is that your medical bills will be paid, and the time of absence, or rather the time you are absent, is also going to be paid for. You're going to get your full pay for the time you are not at work. That is a benefit under WIBA. It is actually a compensation for what we call temporary incapacity, because it is not permanent. You've been incapacitated, you get your pay, that is your compensation. But let's say you lost an arm, or someone died, God forbid, worst case scenario, they died. What happens? When you die, it is 100% disability. When you lose an eye, probably it is what, maybe 20-30%. There's a schedule that determines what percentage that is. You've lost the tip of a finger, maybe it's 10% or 15% or even 7%. It is a prerogative of the doctor to determine how much ability you have lost. So the doctor will fill DOSH 1 part 2 that now details the kind of injury you suffered and what percentage you lost in terms of ability as a human being, ability to function normally from where you are before. So let's say you get 100% because you've died, or you lost maybe a certain function that the doctor feels this is actually 100%. What is the compensation for that person? I want you to take your calculators and look at this. 100% is 100 over 100, right? So you have 1. Say this person was being paid what? Take even 30,000, for example. That was their pay. Their basic pay. All allowances put together. You remember the information you are putting in DOSH 1 part 1? All that information. That is basic pay. And I'm not talking about net pay, because net pay is not a reflection of how much you earn. Net pay is a reflection of what the government has done to you and what you've done to yourself with SACCOs and the other areas that you've indulged in. Okay? So basic pay multiply with 96 months. 96 months is an equivalent of 8 years of working. Okay? Now, as an employer, I'll tell you this, that can be very expensive depending on the cadre of the employee that you have lost. So the best thing is transfer that liability to an insurance company by getting what we call a WIBA cover, so that in the event that there is a claim, that claim is actually going to be paid by insurance. The medical bills that you've catered for this injured person, the vehicle they have used, the taxi they have used going to clinic and doctor visits, all those bills, you put them together and your insurance is going to compensate you because it is all covered under WIBA. But even in the event that someone has died, then this information is going to go to DOSH. Now remember, part 2 of DOSH 1 has been filled, it goes to DOSH. The director calculates the compensation to be done, and using the formula percentage disability multiplied by basic pay multiplied by 96 months. That is going to be put down in a form we call WIBA 4, and that is a claim form that DOSH is going to send to the employer, not to the insurance company. DOSH is not dealing with the insurance company. It is you as an employer who has transferred liability to the insurance company. So it is upon you to take the claim and transfer it to your insurance company and make that claim so that they pay that claim. Okay? So where does this money go to? It is going to be written the name of the person who suffered the injury. And they are not going to be called by insurance and told kujia check yako. Hapana, that check goes to DOSH. So that DOSH can call the injured employee and tell them, come and sign that you have actually received your full compensation. If you have a dispute about how much has been paid, you still have a recourse. You can go back now and say, hii pesa ni kidogo, mimi naenda kotini. It's allowed. DOSH is not the last line. We have courts in this country. You can take your employer to court and say, hii pesa ni kidogo. My friend, ole wako, if you had been compensated at say 100,000, and then you take your employer to court and your employer wins the case and probably you get a lesser amount, let's say 60,000, you can't come back and say, hey, wacha tuchukue ile ya WIBA. The moment you're done with WIBA, you're done with WIBA. You decide to go to the courts, you'll go to the courts. And that is only if you're not okay with WIBA. Because if you take your employer to court directly, even the courts will take you back to DOSH. In fact, all cases WIBA were referred back to DOSH for administration. If that is not addressed, now you can go to court. Okay? So the beauty of WIBA is that in the shortest period of time, because WIBA requires that your payment is done within 90 days. And if your insurance has any dispute, they need to raise it within 60 days. So you still have time to address the dispute. Because probably the doctor is your uncle and you've only suffered 20% disability. And because it's your uncle and they know the repercussions, they decide, I'm going to give my nephew or my niece 50% disability. Insurance looks at it and they are like, no, this is not true. This is not a true reflection of, you can't be 50% disability and you're running around town. So they decide, no, we want to do another assessment. They can decide to do an assessment and say, we dispute this figure. It is not 50%, it is 5%. If you're also not comfortable with that, DOSH can now convene a panel of doctors based on the injury that you suffered. They could have, different, they could have an orthopedic, they could have any other category of a doctor to be able to determine your case and say, okay, it may not be the 50% you are given by your uncle, it could not be the 50%, the 5% insurance is saying, but we think it's around 20-25%, and that is the final. If you're not comfortable with that, you're still free to go to court. Okay? So now, at what point do you get paid? You only get paid for permanent disability. You also get paid for temporary incapacity because you'll be paid your salary even if you're not going to work. Your medical bills will be taken care of by the employer, including if you needed a nurse at home. That will also be catered for by your employer. So there's still a benefit. You may not get the monetary benefit in cash, but you'll be getting your salary and you're getting your medical bills paid and all the support you need during your temporary incapacity. That is still a benefit under WIBA 2007. Are there cases where people have not been paid? Yes, and there are many. And what do you do about that? DOSH is able to push the employers to actually pay by using different channels and different tools. They have different tools of making sure your employer is paying you. But if that also does not work, DOSH can advise you now to go to court, the Labor Relations Court, and take your employer to court and say, WIBA 4 was given by DOSH, but they have refused to pay, or they have delayed unnecessarily to pay this amount. The employer probably will come and say, I honestly don't have this much, and I did not have insurance. So you could agree on a payment plan. They could decide, I'm going to pay you this much, this much, this much until we complete the payment. If you agree, the better. Even the courts encourage out-of-court agreements. But if that is not agreed on, now the judge can decide to make that WIBA 4 claim into a court order, where now they say, this is what is going to be the ruling of the court, that pay this person this amount. And now that becomes a court order. And now it's employer against the courts. And of course, defying the courts is basically contempt of court. And the court has ways of making sure that you comply. So that is the beauty of WIBA 2007. And if you look at what used to happen before, you used to go take a lawyer, the one that you can afford. And the company takes a lawyer they can afford. You fight for 5, 10, 15 years, you get your compensation. Part of that compensation, either you'll get it or you'll not get it. The legal fees themselves, they cut that amount into a huge chunk, into a very small chunk. So by the time you're getting your compensation, sometimes even people had given up on it. So the beauty of WIBA is that it is 90 days process. If there are disputes, it could be longer. But then, if you got injured 2 years ago, it's not the time to go now and tell your employer, I want to be compensated under WIBA. Your WIBA claim expires after 12 months. If you've not claimed anything under WIBA, in 12 months, it is gone. So, you as an employee also has a right to claim, to see a notification to DOSH that the accident that you suffered was actually notified to DOSH and the process is actually rolling. Okay? Now, I've had cases where people ask, so what happens in case I don't get well, even within the 12 months, I'm still under treatment past the 12 months? I think there is a room where now a permanent disability assessment can be done and you're compensated. And if it's not enough, you can always go back to the director and say, I was compensated at this level, but I think after treatment, I realized that was also not enough. The director can make adjustments and do a further compensation to you as the victim. So basically, what are we saying about WIBA 2007? Number one, advice to employers: transfer that liability to an insurance company. Okay, so that your relationship with the employee does not become a very uncomfortable one when they get injured. And because you're paying your claims, you'll also be happy that at least they've been compensated. So don't be happy they got injured because you have insurance. No, you just be happy that in case it happened, then at least they'll get their compensation and they continue working. And you don't fire them. All you do is reallocate them lighter duties, even as they continue their recovery journey. What do you need to do as an employee? You just need to know that there is WIBA. And in case your person has died, a relative has died in the course of duty, it is up to you to know that there is WIBA and follow it up and just find out when will that claim actually be paid. But now the other thing to also be very careful about, especially for people who are employees. You know, most of us, when we go to the workplace and we give HR our details, most of us gave our mothers, you know, our aunties as the dependents during that period. Now, to avoid issues, please put your affairs in order. Decide who are these people you want to get your compensation in the event that you die in the workplace. And you're not saying you're going to die, but neither are you immortal. All right? And it could happen to anyone. If it happens in the course of duty, you're lucky because your people will be compensated. If it happens out of the workplace, then there are other means. I mean, depends on what happens to you. But put your affairs in order, because there have been issues, especially with disbursement of money to dependents, because you realize there are more dependents that actually than people knew, or the dependents who are quoted are actually not the real dependents. So it is good to just make the process seamless. Put your affairs in order right now by giving your HR the right details, so that if anything happens to you and you're not the person receiving the compensation, then it's easier to actually administer that payment. Contact us for more advice on health and safety. Write to us, call us, reach out to us on our socials, and we'll be able to give you more competent advice, and particularly on compliance with WIBA and OSHA 2007. Thank you.